Our AC broke during the worst heat wave in July. My husband left town the same day. And when the repair guy said, "It's way too hot in here," I said something I shouldn't have. My name's Valerie. I'm 44. I've been married to Tom for almost 20 years. We have a good life. Big house, 2 grown kids off at college, and a quiet routine that mostly runs itself. But sometimes quiet turns into lonely. And lonely turns into reckless. Tom's an engineer, logical, precise, and lately, distracted. He used to reach for my hand in the car. Now he checks emails at red lights. Used to kiss my neck while I cooked. Now he just asks when dinner's ready. We don't fight. We just coexist. Polite, predictable, married, but not really together. The day it all started, the heat had settled over our house like a wet wool blanket. I was wearing one of his old college t-shirts, drenched with sweat, pacing near the broken thermostat like I could will it back to life. And of course, that's when Tom called. "Babe, I've got to fly to Phoenix early." 3 nights, maybe 4. I left a note about the AC guy. He'll be there by 3. That was it. No, sorry. No, stay cool. Just logistics. I hung up and stared at the ceiling fan as it spun pointlessly above me. When the doorbell rang at 3:17, I nearly jumped. I wasn't ready. My hair was pulled up, my cheeks were flushed, and I'd thrown on a thin tank top that clung in all the wrong places. He was standing there in cargo pants and a charcoal t-shirt darkened with sweat. Mid-30s, sun-browned skin, easy smile. "Ma'am," he said. "I'm Jake. Here to check out your AC unit." Even his voice sounded cool. I led him through the house, trying not to feel self-conscious about how hot and sticky everything felt, especially me. "Been brutal out," he said, glancing at the ceiling fan. "This old system's probably screaming for mercy." He chuckled. I did too, nervously. I offered him water. He took it, nodding his thanks, eyes lingering a little longer than necessary. Not in a sleazy way. In a way that said he noticed me. I don't know how long it had been since a man really noticed me. Jake got to work, vanishing into the garage, then out back near the unit. I tried reading. I tried folding laundry. I ended up just watching him through the blinds. He moved like someone who knew exactly what he was doing, deliberate, calm, competent. Something about that made me feel fluttery, unsettled. Like I was 16 again and crushing on a guy fixing his car across the street. When he came back in, his shirt was damp. "So," he said, wiping his brow, "your unit's ancient. Like, should have been retired during Obama ancient. It's running hot and barely pushing cool air." I sighed, letting my frustration show. "Figures. Everything in this house is old and tired." He paused, eyes locking with mine. "I wouldn't say that." It hit me like a pulse in my throat. He leaned on the doorframe and smiled, not cocky, not aggressive. Just curious. "You sure your husband's okay with you roasting in here alone?" he asked. I froze. My heart thudded. "He's out of town." Jake nodded slowly, like that explained everything. "Well," he said, "it's too hot in here. Let's cool things down." It was harmless. A throwaway line. But the way he said it, my stomach flipped. He started replacing a part, and I hovered. Asked questions I didn't care about just to keep the conversation going. And then it slipped out. "I'm glad it broke today," I said softly. "Otherwise I wouldn't have met you." He looked up, eyes narrowing just a touch. "Is that so?" I nodded. He stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans. The air around us was hotter than ever. Or maybe it was just me. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I can come back tomorrow. Make sure the system's holding." I should have said no. I should have thanked him and shut the door. But instead I said, "Come back around the same time. I'll be here." He hesitated for half a second, then smiled. "Good. I like the heat." He turned to leave, and as he did, his fingers brushed mine as I handed him the receipt. Just a second. Just a touch. But I felt it all the way to my throat. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands still tingling. The house was cooler, but inside me, everything had started to burn. The next morning, I woke up in Tom's side of the bed. His pillows still smelled like the cologne he sprays on every morning without thinking, a scent I've known for half my life. But it was faint, already fading. I hadn't slept much. I kept replaying the way Jake had looked at me when he left. Like he knew something was going to happen. Like maybe it already had. I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth and noticed something strange. I looked, flushed, bright, like someone who'd been touched, even though I hadn't. Jake hadn't done anything. Neither had I. But everything had changed. By the time the clock hit 2:30, I was pacing again. I'd showered, tried on 3 different tops, then settled on something loose, but not careless. Effortless. Like I wasn't trying to impress him, even though I was. At 3:03, the doorbell rang. Jake stood there with the same easy smile, though this time I saw the flicker in his eyes. Like he'd been thinking about it too. He stepped inside, commenting that it already felt cooler. I lied and said I hadn't noticed. He moved through the house, checking vents and pressures and panels. I followed again, like a shadow. Our conversation stayed casual, but there were pauses. Charged silences. The kind you only get when both people are pretending they don't feel what they do. At one point, I handed him a glass of lemonade, and our fingers touched again. Longer this time. Deliberate. "You always this nice to service guys?" he asked, lips curling. "Only when they make things work again," I said, stepping closer. He didn't move back. Just looked at me like he was reading every thought in my head. "Valerie." My name on his lips stopped me. Soft. Familiar. Dangerous. I swallowed. Yes. He leaned against the kitchen counter, looking me over in a way that wasn't rude, but wasn't innocent either. "You ever wonder what it would feel like to not be invisible anymore?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. "Because I see you." I took a shaky breath. Turned away. Opened the fridge for no reason. "This is a bad idea." "Then why haven't you asked me to leave?" I stood there, hand on the fridge door, heart pounding. Because I liked the heat. Because he saw me. Because Tom never says my name like that anymore. "I haven't done anything," I whispered. "Yet," he said. I turned to face him. Our eyes locked. A war played out silently in that moment. Then the sound of my phone vibrating on the counter snapped it all. "Tom." Jake stepped back. Cleared his throat. "You should get that." I did. Voice trembling, I answered. Tom's voice poured through the line like lukewarm water. Distant. Distracted. Telling me he'd be home tomorrow night instead of Friday. "Everything okay there?" he asked. Jake was still in the room. "Yeah," I lied. "The AC guy came back." "Good," Tom said. "Glad it's all taken care of." I wanted to say something more. Anything. But I didn't. And he didn't ask. We hung up. I turned around. Jake was watching me, jaw tight. "So that's it? You go back to playing house." "I never said I was unhappy," I said quickly, defensively. "You didn't have to." I should have told him to go. Instead, I stepped forward. He met me halfway. It wasn't even a touch. But we crossed a line we couldn't uncross. We stood there, barely inches apart, sharing air, sharing silence, sharing something louder than any words. "If I come back tomorrow," he whispered, "what are we doing, Valerie?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Jake left a few minutes later, without looking back. I locked the door behind him and leaned my forehead against it, guilt washing over me in thick, sick waves. I hadn't cheated. But I hadn't exactly been faithful either. The next day, Tom came home early. Earlier than he said. I was in the backyard trying to stop my hands from shaking when I heard his car. "Hey," he said, pulling his suitcase in, loosening his tie. "You're early. Missed my flight yesterday." Took the red eye. He looked around. Something in his gaze lingered. "Feels different in here." I froze. "The air?" He nodded. "Cooler." He walked to the counter and picked up a glass. Then stopped. "Whose is this?" He held up a second glass of lemonade. Jake's. The one I hadn't rinsed. "The AC guys," I said quickly. He came back to check the system. "Right," Tom said, slowly setting the glass down. Then he pulled out his phone. Opened the security app. I hadn't even thought about it. The camera in the foyer, He stared at the screen for too long. Too quietly. You didn't tell me he stayed that long. I opened my mouth. Closed it. You stood really close to him, he added, still not looking at me. My throat went dry. Nothing happened, I whispered. He finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were hollow. Not yet, he said. That night, Tom didn't sleep in our bed. He took a pillow and went to the guest room without a word. The house was cool. Too cool. I wrapped myself in a blanket, but it didn't help. I stared at the ceiling fan and thought about Jake. About Tom. About the moment that split my life in two. In the morning, Tom had already left for work. But on the table, there was a note. It said, "The AC works fine. The marriage doesn't." Beside it, he left his ring. I left everything else.